Okay.
Welcome back to another episode. She's back again. It's been a long time. I'm so happy to have you on, Valerie. It's nice to see you again. I'm not going to act like we didn't just talk for about 10 minutes, but it's great to have you back on the show.
Well, thanks. It's really great to be here. I really look forward to talking to you because you never know what's going to happen when you're on Robbie's podcast.
I know, and you were hinting at that you might be interested into some conspiracy type stuff, and we always talk about the ancient Greece, and I would love to talk about that too, mostly because I've been asking questions about, with this idea, has it the mass amount of creativity that's been inspired throughout history. I think it's no different than what it is today. I think creative minds are getting looked at, obviously, but I feel like they also get misplaced in sometimes too. The words, like for instance, if I was going to say something that would be known and quotable, it wouldn't be taken as that. It wouldn't even be really valued as quotable. But if I had fame behind my name, if I had an idea or an image like a Kanye West style thing, it would be looked at and quoted and put on motivational posters. The process of information, or the way that we value information, has changed throughout society, mostly being the actual representation or the meaning of a quote. Say if it was spoken from Plato, now was he valued in his time? In some aspects, yes. But now it's only compared to if you were seen on the movie screen, if you were played in a Mission Impossible, then your quote is valued, rather than someone finding a random video and actually pulling something from that video that could get them through a time where they necessarily needed something to help them get them through to the next day.
Well, I'd go with that as a representation of our society right now. But I think there's something really interesting going on right now, which might be bringing us back to a world like you might have found, for example, in ancient Athens, the kind of world that Plato wrote about. Because one of the things that we can see, even if we look back at our own society, American society, British society, English speaking society, even 100 years ago, the kinds of people who would have the education necessary to sit back and do what we're doing and reflect on, how people come up with ideas, how they share ideas, exploring ideas, seeing how far they can go, seeing how far you can stretch them. Those people would have been a pretty small group, and they would have all known each other. Now, a lot of energy is expended right now in universities, especially in America and Britain and Canada, highlighting how that kind of smaller society was problematic, even oppressive, a lot of negative discourse. While there's something to be said for a lot of those viewpoints, I think that one of the things that I've gotten when I read a lot of history is that a lot of people know each other, or they knew each other, right? And they naturally would have known each other because they would have all come from the same, broadly speaking, social groups, or they would have all gathered at the same colleges and universities, and they would have gotten to know each other. And I think, even if you want to say, well, they were all from the same social groups because they were homogenous, because other people were kept out, and this is not what we want to have in our society. Okay, well, let's take that to one side. I think what we're seeing now is a lot of people who want to think about ideas and wonder about why we do things the way we do them, or create literature, art, music. They feel really isolated. But as a result of this, we're reaching out online, because that's the biggest world we have. So you see people gathering around different podcasts, or different YouTube channels, or different Twitter accounts. They get a lot of traction. And one of the things that I've noticed is that you still need that fame, like you were talking about. Oh, if I thought of something that really helped me get through, no one's going to find it because I'm not famous. But if we look at fame, I think fame is really changing because of online virality, right? So I think you still need to have like that initial fame. Like, look at Joe Rogan. You know, he was initially famous for being a comedian, then an MMA fighter, then he was on Fear Factor. Now he has a podcast. So he had that original fame, but he took it and he made it into something else that he could bring other people into. And so, like, also, I've been watching a lot of his videos recently on YouTube. Look at Russell Brand. I hadn't thought about Russell Brand in about a zillion years. And the last thing I remembered about him was that he, had some sort of MTV job and he did some really shocking stuff. And I just thought, oh, who is this guy? He's another sort of shock jock. And I clicked on the video and I realized, yeah, he used that springboard of original fame, but he's really become someone completely different. He's completely sober now. He's spent a lot of time thinking about the nature of reality, the nature of life. He has a meditation channel, and then he's also just exploring the news. So we have this really interesting dynamic going on right now, I feel like, where people have to have some degree of fame because the internet's huge and the internet's also pretty well controlled these days, let's be honest. And so, someone who's completely unknown, like, for example, me, is not really going to be found. I mean, I will probably be found by a very small network of people who actually search for me by name, which is pretty rare. But you can have fame from something, take it and make it into something else. Whereas before, like when cultural outputs were more centralized, like when we had the Hollywood studio system in the 30s and 40s, the directors, the big bosses, they decided, okay, we're going to make a movie about this. We're not going to make a movie about that. We didn't really have independent movies except for Orson Welles because he was really rich and he was just like, I can finance my own movie and I can make it. And so that's why we have Orson Welles movies, which is great. But everything was a lot more centralized. Now with the internet, we're watching things becoming decentralized, I think. So I'm really interested to see where we go from here, because right now, a lot of the things that I'm seeing online, and especially on like the comments on Russell Brand's channel, people are saying, well, now I go to a comedian for my news.
Yeah, well, I mean, toilet Googling somehow has become the actual average intelligence soaking up of actual information processing now because you come across some crazy stuff. And I mean, news has it went from comedic shows like Jon Stewart and all these types of things that were acceptable to joke about these serious issues that were going on to leading into podcasts and now finding a TikTok video or something that leads you down a rabbit hole of giving you some information that might be critical. No way in the world I would have thought Russell Brand would become this whole entire, against the left wing. He was as left as I thought he could possibly go. But
But
left is now right and right is now left.
sort of, I mean, I think from what I've seen of him and from what he's said, he is still pretty much in the left wing. I mean, he is, what does he call himself? An anarcho-syndicalist? I mean,
What I'm saying is though that the left I views that he believes in is now part of what the right wing is actually doing. The thing is that
oh right,
everything has
yes,
become so
yes.
divisive.
Everything
The
we're
polls have
all,
switched.
yeah, we're all topsy-turvy. Well,
Well, without getting into the whole politics bush, what I think this all is a giant grasp for authenticity. People want authenticity. They're going through withdrawal without it. I had this idea of we look at radio, for instance. The whole radio industry has died. I have family members that work in the radio industry. They have guests on that are sponsors of those people, and they talk about the same things, but it's diluted. It's crap. It's garbage. Radio is dead. Radio used to be a free expression of ideas and a free flow of information. That's what now podcasts have kind of led in that direction. Podcasts are now dying. Podcasts are leading into reaction videos or Twitch streaming or some other type of form of information like TikTok videos. I think it's so hard because everything now has a motive behind it. And I think that's a constitute of if we look through ancient history or anything back in the day, politics have always been the feud. There's always been a grasp with politics. There's always been a sided view when it comes to war efforts or whatever you want to say when it happens to do the structure of a civilization. It's the same thing happening now, but now it's consumed our whole entire lives. And here's the difference between back then and right now is that there's more thinking of individual thoughts than there has been ever throughout history. There's more people than ever. There's more minds thinking in a different way than ever before. There's more creative grasp for thought or more creative grasp for trying to create something new. But the issue is the templates that they're working off of. They're being sold a template from a Gary Vee, from a Matthew McConaughey, from a Brad Pitt, from a Jennifer Aniston, from Mariah Carey. In no way in history did we ever expect our rappers not to do abrasive shit. And everyone's giving the baby crap for saying some homophobic slur. That's horrible that he did that. But do I expect my rapper to be politically correct? No. Do I expect Jennifer Aniston to talk about wearing a mask in a store? No. Do I expect Terry Bradshaw to call out a quarterback for not taking a vaccine? No. But it's happening because you're putting unrealistic expectations on people who necessarily shouldn't fit that bar. And sadly, everybody's trying to be like a Mario character in basketball. They're trying to be all around it good at everything rather than what we just expected them to be good for. Did you expect George Orwell to be anything more than the person that he was? You didn't expect him to go donate to Africa. You didn't expect him to go stop AIDS. You didn't expect him to go do these things, but people are now putting their hero, their influencer, like a Superman. Superman was everyone's hero back in the day. Then that boiled down to your parents. But then you understood that your parents could not do everything like save the world or stop a bullet. Now they're expecting people on the news or their president or whoever to be the type of clear all savior to save everything. And that is not your answer. Gavin Newsom is not your daddy. Gavin Newsom is not your mommy. Jen Psaki isn't your mommy. Jen Psaki isn't your daddy. But people want to put the faith in these people instead of doing things for themselves, where that is reverting back to something that, in my eyes, is horrible. Because now you're not thinking as an individual anymore. You're not being the person that you're supposed to be because now your thoughts are controlled by the stuff that gets put on the news. And maybe it's stopping you from reaching the destiny that you're supposed to have.
Well, wow. You said a lot there, and there's a lot to unpack. And I know when we started, I said that I was totally open to talking about current events, and you said, well, we always talk about ancient Greece. And I said, well, I bet I can get these two things to connect. And my first thought was, people are looking at rappers or sports stars or people who are good at one particular thing, right? And that's why they're famous. And they're looking at them as examples of how to do everything, right? So here's somebody who's really good at football, but I want to know, where he lives and how he decided to buy a house and what kind of car he drives and all that sort of stuff. Why is that important? Well, I think we've got the legacy media really pushing people to idolize celebrities and then want to act like them in all of these respects because they want to put forward a particular narrative. They have a narrative of their own. Like you said, everybody has a narrative. That's absolutely true. But there is a link to ancient Greece because one of the issues that Plato addressed in his dialogues through Socrates is the fact that at that time in ancient Athens, there were people going around basically like motivational speakers, like teachers, like Gary Vee, going around saying, I can show you how to get people to do what you want them to do. I can make you into the best marketer, the best speaker, the most persuasive, the most successful person. And those people were sophists, right? And so the sophists were saying, I know how to do one thing, which is speaking persuasively. So I can teach you how to do everything. I can teach you how to be a successful person, how to be a great person. And Socrates would go around poking holes in this, saying, well, here are these people, maybe they're experts in one thing, But then they claim when you go up to them and you say, well, you know, you're really good at public speaking, but what do you know about building a house? And then they'd say, oh, I know everything about building a house, blah, blah, blah. And what's Socrates famous for? He's famous for going to the oracle at Delphi and asking the oracle to talk to him, to give him a message. And the oracle says, well, Socrates is the wisest man. And Socrates takes this message and he says, well, this doesn't make any sense at all, because I know I'm not the wisest man. There's so many things I don't know anything about. I don't know anything about building a house. I don't know anything about sailing a ship, or, you know, fill in the blank, whatever. And then Socrates was making his way home, so the story goes, it finally occurred to him, because of course in his worldview, in his religion, the oracle gave him a message from the god Apollo. And as sketchy as Apollo can be in different myths and tragedies, he's still usually not supposed to be wrong, right? Because he's the god of prophecy. So Socrates was thinking, well, how is this true? And then he realized it was true because he was the man who recognized that he didn't know things. So he had a clear grasp of what he did understand and what he didn't understand. And he was honest about it. And that made him the wisest man. So I do think like it's probably a human drive to find somebody who's good at something, or who does something that, you know, you really admire or respect, and want to just look up at that person, make that person your hero, idolize that person. I think it's a human
It's believing in false
drive.
gods.
Yeah, well, I mean, but we want to do that. And Socrates talks about, you know, who do we actually believe that the gods are? Do we really, when we go to the temple and we give our offering and we say our prayers, do we believe that the entity we're giving these offerings to is the same entity as in the myths, right?
Yep.
Socrates addresses this question.
But
And
the issue would be the example of like I think it's just like religion. I think religion's important as well too. You don't necessarily need to believe in it. A lot of people don't. I don't believe in it. You don't. I'm not going to change anybody or make anybody's decision. So I'll never take that from anybody. I think it's important to have belief. But when you start believing in false gods, in a sense of people are structuring their lives basis on what these people sell them. These people, Gary Vee sells them a book on how to be successful, and they don't get successful like Gary Vee, but they think that they will. They capture that weakness in a person's idea or mental fortitude because they've been beaten down by life. And I don't think it's a human error. I think it's a government or systematic error. I think there's a system in play that has this formula of making 9-to-5 workers, and if you slip out of that peg, they'll do anything to beat you and put you back into that thing. I think this is a thoughts are so important and authenticity is so important, but we're missing a lot of that. A lot of people don't have the time or the hours or the patience to try and think or do anything for themselves. They need to work because life is too damn hard that they have to try and afford the home and feed their families. That shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't be in this position where if I go to fill up my gas tank once a week, it's 40 something dollars when it used to be 20. I'm not blaming a president. I'm blaming a system that is constantly making life so damn difficult for kids or people to be able to move out of their home or find a way of a little bit of light in this world to have a little bit of happiness. We used to have natural restarts in this world, which was the skies at night. The stars up in the skies used to bring you a sense of peace, but we sacrifice that by just wanting lights in our homes, using light pollution to block out some of these stars that are up in the sky. What about the air? What about the wind? What about the natural flow of the earth that can reset a person's personality? That's gone as well too. I think there's systematic issues that we're not focusing on because we've let this luxury into our lives that has now become a requirement. That means technology, that means a car, that means all these things. They're essential. Why are they essential when they were just luxuries at a certain point? We've now sacrificed our capacity to be able to survive on our own or think on our own because we've looked to other people to do that for us for so long. Maybe not you or me, but most of the public, because they have to work. They have to do so many things. We have to work too, but in a sense that they can't think about these things because they have other things at the forefront. My buddy works in a warehouse and he has to give up his job because he has to get a mandatory vaccine and he doesn't want to. So he has to go look for a new job. He talks about, I don't have the time. I have to work because I have to go home and feed my family and my kids. I'm working for them. It's not about me becoming a hot sauce maker or doing something for myself. I don't want the world to be like that. And it's never been like that before. It's been mandated before. It's been controlled throughout history, but there's never been this so much of willingness to concede. There has never been that. This is the first time in history where, I mean, there's always been oppression, but this is knowing oppression. This is not caring to stand up for yourself anymore. And when you do stand up, you stand up for the in the dumbest way possible. I don't think that the world is bad. I don't think that the world is inherently 100% good. I don't think people are bad, and I don't think people are 100% good either. I think there's a mix of it. But I also think that it's been shown for a very long time that the curtain is closed without a sense of light coming into the door. And I think that's a systematic issue that has been building up for so long, where now they're getting away with it for a large sense of the means. They keep people in the dark. I don't think that's right. I don't think if you were going to ask, like, the idea of an Aristotle being created, I think society used to make creatives. I think now it's forced them into submission. I don't, I think a lot of people are trying to find their sliver of light or their nectar of the gods in a sense. And I don't think there's a lot of opportunity to be able to do so. If we talk about during the pandemic, entrepreneurs before the pandemic started was, be your own entrepreneur, start your own business. We'll support you. We'll give you a loan. We'll do all that. Then during the pandemic, how many people did that? A lot of people did. And you know what happened? They failed. You know why they failed? Because the system was disguised as being beneficial to be an entrepreneur, and it really wasn't. It's a corporate owned thing. And all those corporations snuffed those people's out. They snuffed even family business people out. That's the same thing with mental health. Society is disguised as we care about your mental health. No, it's not. There's
No,
no systems in play for that. You put up a
no,
poster, you put up a person crying on the screen saying they're pro mental health. That's not pro mental health. Pro mental
no,
health is caring about your fellow man and fellow
is
people.
actually giving you space. Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And on a personal note, my family, you could say, is involved in the tourism industry. My dad runs a very small hotel in Hawaii. And, Hawaii is not really open for business even now. So you can imagine the kind of ripple effects that's had on my family. And I grew up with my dad being an entrepreneur. He went to law school, was a lawyer for a while, and decided, actually, I would rather go join this family business that was just starting up, between his father and his brother. And at this point, he's the only one running what's left of this family business. So it's just him. And he did have some good times. We did have some really good times. He's been able to employ the same core staff that he's had basically the entire time the business has been running. So he's been able to provide them with stable livelihoods. But the whole system does not foster entrepreneurship. He's always put in really hard situations, in terms of like healthcare costs or different regulatory issues that are really, we could change them to make them more small business friendly, but they don't, because you're exactly right. The system will tell you, oh, be an entrepreneur, go run your own business, go be a freelancer. It'll be great. You can set your own hours, you can do your own thing, and you can make money. Awesome. But then you actually try to do that. You don't make enough money. They try to take most of it in taxes. How do you sort out healthcare? I mean, there are all these questions, and the system is not interested in answering any of those questions. And then, just like you said earlier, if you leave the 9 to 5, if you don't have a corporate job, or if you lose your corporate job and you can't or don't want to get another one, and you go off into entrepreneurship or freelancing or the gig economy, as much as that's being encouraged, you get punished in all sorts of ways. And there are all these tensions in our society that I think the pandemic just made so obvious, because before, when people were getting by, you could just sort of paper over the cracks. And now you can't, because we've seen the single largest wealth transfer from the lower classes, the middle and lower classes, to the billionaire class in the pandemic. Jeff Bezos made the most money he ever made in a single year. And you're going to tell me that makes sense? No, it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense unless it's, like you said, by design.
I'm not mad at a Jeff Bezos, even though his conditions are crap, but he's just looking at the most effective way of running a company. See, the issue is that people let it slide. What happens is you take the $18 an hour and you let them treat you like trash because they're paying you so much. There used to be actual, like, it's why I only work for family places. I only work for small businesses. I don't like working for giant corporations because I don't like to be treated like a number. I like to be treated like a person. And there isn't that personal connection anymore. The reason why McDonald's probably led to the situation that it's in, where it contaminated a whole, I guess, society, making people obese, is the concept of he didn't care about anybody that wasn't in his family. My kids are going to be great. My kids are going to have money. I'm going to make money. My kids are going to make money. My kids are going to make money. You're telling me I have to worry about 10 generations away, where in some small Middle Eastern country, they're getting lead or something in their water? I don't care. Build a business. There's a disconnect when it comes to the community. When you used to look, let's say ancient Greece, for instance, the people knew each other in that community. They were connected. They had to trade with each other. They had to get along with each other. You can either rule by power, or you can rule by fear, or you can rule with love. And sadly, how many people have really gotten power out without history or throughout history and really given it back? I think there was one person in recorded history that was working on a farm and a bunch of people ran up to him asking him to help the town or whatever. Do you remember who this person was? I can look his name up.
Well, if you're talking about people who got like governmental authority and then gave it back, there's a very famous story from ancient Rome of the dictator Cincinnatus. And
I'm
his
talking about
name's
Lucius Quincidus Cincinnatus. Yeah, that's him.
yeah, that's Cincinnati. That's
Yeah.
exactly Cincinnati.
He was working
So
on a farm and
he
a bunch
was
of people ran up to him and asked him to help him take back this town or save all these people. He gave up the power and he died on his farm.
yes, he was on his property, and I think he had a role in the Roman Republic previous to this. I should be better at this history off the top of my head, but I'm a Hellenist. Sorry, guys. So anyway, and everybody knew that he was wise, and everybody respected his opinion. Everybody, that is the social group who could appoint a dictator. And a dictator was not a permanent position in the Roman Republic. It was a position that would be for a limited period when they were in crisis, right? And so Cincinnatus recognized that, and he took control in the crisis, made the decisions he needed to make, and then he said, okay, I'm going to retire. I'm going to go back to my farm. Please let me retire. And what I think is really significant about American history is that our founding fathers, whatever you might think of them, knew this history. They knew the story of Cincinnatus, and George Washington himself was very inspired by it. In fact, he didn't want to be king. He agreed to be he agreed to run for president basically when everybody insisted. And then he only ran for president twice, and of course he was elected twice. And then he said, okay, I'm done now. I'm going to go and retire to my farm, to Mount Vernon, and everybody else, you've got to learn how to run this new country on your own. That's why we have the tradition that presidents only run for 2 terms. And then, of course, FDR violated that, but that's a different story for another day. But I think it's really significant that our country was founded by a group of men who knew that history and had that at the forefront of their minds. They were thinking, okay, power is so attractive. It's really hard for most people to give
Power
up.
corrupts, absolutely.
Yeah, power corrupts, power corrupts, absolutely. And I think we've seen that play out now well, can I even say post-pandemic? But I will say, post-pandemic lockdowns, because in a lot of states, a lot of governors took these emergency powers, just like the dictatorial powers in ancient Rome. They exist in state constitutions for moments of extreme crisis, for true emergencies. And they say, okay, in a true emergency, you can rule by fiat. You can just say stuff and people have to respect it. But there has to be a limit to that. And I think what we're seeing now is that this idea of, like, for example, an endless foreign war like Afghanistan, which we just barely got out of, right? That was a war that was older than a lot of people on Earth. There were some roles in Afghanistan where a father had had one post, and then his son took the post from him. And the only parallel to that we can see is in the later Roman Empire, where in the outskirts of the empire, for example, in Britain, I think there are several instances of sons inheriting posts from fathers. And, that is what gives this idea of the American empire, to me, real credence, because even if we as Americans don't like to think of ourselves as an imperial power, and we see American ideology as one that advocates democracy and freedom of expression and things like that, we are behaving, especially overseas, like the Roman Empire. And then we've got, governors and state officials who take these dictatorial powers, these emergency powers, and they use them. And maybe that's justified in a short-term crisis. But now, as we see people want to extend the crisis period, they want to extend it. And then the question becomes, okay, but when is it over? Do we live in perpetual crisis?
Yeah.
Is that where we are now?
Forever, because people love the fear narrative, and those people that love the fear narrative are the same people that haul past the idea of you need to be vaccinated or not. There's a large amount of people that have never had power in their everyday life, and now they feel like they have a sense of power because they can grab an army of Twitter followers and condemn you for whatever you choose or choose not to do. The idea that you can police somebody medically or tell somebody they have to get this because it saves this when there's no evidence on either side about anything about this sort is fucking astounding to me. I go, you know what? I'll take the medical advice when you could tell me my middle name. Just tell me my middle name and I'll fucking do whatever you say. But people don't. They say things because they like a position of power, whether it's the government or whether it's people on social media. They need to grab an army of followers, and they don't understand that army of followers that you built up will be more than happy to turn the pitchfork the other way and stab you right in the eye with it. That same happened with Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein was an evolutionary biologist who led a giant thing in STEM, about wanting to make STEM equal after he had heard about a horrible rape that had happened on campus. Try to gather up all these people to go, stop this academia from being so biased or fixing the situation that was obviously a racial discrimination. They eventually turned on him and literally brought it to a point where they said, we're going to have 1 day a week on campus where there's no white people that are allowed to be here. And they chased him into the parking lot with bats. The person that led the storm in charge, they turned on him and led to him because he was a white man. You start to realize the aspect of things is that the power, the army that you build up, this type of thing, you start stirring people up in such a sense that nobody's thinking clearly anymore. And then you start to see violence start to happen. And it's never violence against the right actions, violence against people that actually do hold the power over everyone's head. And those are the corporate elites, the people that can pass something and not give a fuck about you or anybody in your town that it affects. That's my issue is that there used to be a consensus that people would overthrow the king, that they would storm the gates, they would all team up together and fight against this obviously unjust or wrongful use of power. Now the power has been established, or the target has been established, to people that are on the same ground level as you. And that's where we start to see the decrease in success, or the decrease in influence, or the decrease in progress in general. And I don't think there's ever going to be peace in the world. Our idea of Americans shouldn't have been over to be in Afghanistan at all. We should have went over there, fought whoever, the idea that it was supposed to be some type of, oh, they got weapons of mass destruction. That wasn't true. There's a bunch of stuff that went wrong. But the idea is that it's all starts with a lie. There's no authenticity anymore. And you would think that with all this bullshit that's been across, that we would have a sense of all this authenticity today. The reason why I'm me on the show is because I could not put up an act for almost 1,000 episodes. I could not do it. And the people that I talk to are people that I'm generally interested in. I don't have people that I'm not interested in having onto my show. That just doesn't happen. You got to be authentic. You got to be you. And then people take it for whatever you want. Maybe I'm not successful because the people don't like me. That's fine. I like myself. At times I do hate myself, but I think a concept of you need to be authentic. You need to be real. You need to be honest. There shouldn't be a restriction on the things that you say. Censorship is my biggest issue because what they choose to censor is what they deem as right. It's gatekeeping information. They had the Wuhan lab or whatever you couldn't talk about for the longest time. Now it's looked into, and now they actually found out that they did fund gain or function research. Okay, so now you're going to block something that was right and say it was a conspiracy. You got to let everything be up. If it's offensive,
Yeah.
if it's any of that stuff, even
Yeah.
if it's bullying, I don't care. Because it's a
Yeah.
double standard. I can't say that we can have all this up here, but we can't have this, because then it draws the line for them to be able to move that line farther and farther until eventually you have nothing that you can say. You got to let it all be up there. It's a free flow of information and people have to process it with what they will, but you shouldn't have a society that is so fragile that when one thing gets tweeted out, they crack. That shouldn't be a thing.
Wow, there's so much to unpack here. I mean, Robbie, you are on fire always, but I think especially now, we're seeing all the weaknesses in our society. I think most of the time, like you said, people are busy, people have their own individual worries, their own individual lives. They need to just focus on those things. And there's a limit to what we can all learn and what we can all know at one time. Our minds are finite. So human beings want to trust, right? We want to trust. We want to believe that the person who comes up and says, okay, you don't know anything about cars, I do. This is the car that I would buy. And these are the reasons why. We want to believe that that person's telling us the truth and not just saying something, so that we're going to buy the most expensive car so that he can get the biggest commission. But I think a big problem we have in our society right now is because the internet has turned into this giant shopping mall where we're being marketed to all the time. We're all really, really jaded in a way that I think is unprecedented in human society, because we're all looking at everything and we're thinking, okay, what's the deal? What's the catch, right? And I think in a way that's healthy, because it's encouraging people to, like you said, think for themselves and analyze what's going on, because everybody does have a narrative and everybody does have a motivation. Even if your motivation is altruistic, it's still your own motivation. At the same time, it causes a lot of problems, because if you're always on guard, you can't really do anything productive. You're always thinking, okay, how do I keep myself safe? How do I keep myself safe? And when when you're truly creative, when you're truly exploring ideas, or sitting down and thinking, okay, how can we do something new? Like Russell Brand ends a lot of his videos with, but I'm not interested in the right or the left wing. I'm not interested in how this particular issue or that particular issue will play out. I'm interested in something completely new. Let's explore completely new ways of organizing our society, or of organizing businesses. And that's something I really appreciate about him. But when you do something completely new, you're inherently vulnerable because it's new, right? It's not tested. It's not something, it's not an established narrative that people can go along with. It's like in high school. If you well, I'll take my sister as an example. So my sister, she's a super creative person. She's gone into coding now, but she's always been really artistic. And she would just put together these outfits that no one in her school had ever seen before. She'd wear her Harry Potter shirt with, Halloween tights in April. Who wears Halloween tights in April? And I mean, it seems like a little bit of a silly example, but when you're in 8th grade, 9th grade, people will read a lot into that. And she would do that. And she would say, well, I wanted to wear this. I wanted to dress like this. And nobody else was, she wasn't a skater. She wasn't a goth. She didn't fit into a group. She was just being herself. And it it was a risk. It was a social risk. And she did get a lot of flack for it, but she did it, and now, she just does what she does, and she's herself, and she's, I think, better for having done that. But our society sends us the message on the one hand that, oh, you should be yourself, you should question authority. But then if you actually want to do that, they come down on you.
Well, you used to be incentivized for doing something extraordinary or doing something that's different than the basic system. But now you're being forced in a position where if you do something that's out of the realm or out of the line, you get punished. You get forced and you get put into a position they just constrict you. They make your life hell. They can't force you. I mean, they're forcing people to get the mandate, but for the people that can't, they'll sure as hell make your life fucking hell to where you can't survive unless you get the thing. I know so many people that got it saying, it was already becoming so difficult to do anything. At this point, you have to get it. And I'm like, yeah, see, you're being forced into a position you shouldn't necessarily be in. Nobody should be forced to do anything when it comes to your ideas, your thoughts, whatever the way you feel. You should never be forced to do anything in your life. Being
No,
put in a situation where you have no other option, there's always another option. But you're being put into a situation where there is only one, and it's do what I say. You're not a child. You don't get put in situations like that. Nobody should ever be forced to feel uncomfortable in this world, and nobody should ever feel like they don't have a choice in life, because that breeds hate. That breeds depression. That breeds a monster of a demon that does not go away. It's a door that you cannot close. And I don't think people understand that. There's a difference between somebody who you don't know with an egg picture tweeting something about you, and there's a difference between somebody that you care about saying something to you and refusing to talk to you again, all because you have different views on certain subjects. That's a very, very dark route. There, back in the South versus the Union, where parents were fighting against brother and sister, or brother and sister were fighting against parents, or all this type of situations that were going on, all because of a difference of views. What's the difference between that now when people can't even agree on their political stances? You used to never bring up politics or religion at the table. Now people bring it up before they even introduce themselves. The gate has been gone, which I think is important. There needs to be a healthy discourse, but the way that's being addressed now is not a healthy discourse. There's no people talking about or having these natural intellectual debates like a chess
no.
match. All they are is fighting. All they are is shutting people down and blocking them if they don't agree. I come across so many people on Twitter that I'm blocked by. I'm like, what the hell did you block me for? Maybe I had a comedic episode that talked about, I don't know, something outrageous or out of the lines, because that's what my show is about. There's fun conversations, there's serious conversations. It goes all over the board, and they judge you off of just one. How do you think that makes me feel? That makes me feel like crap. But at the same time, there's a million other people out there that'll be more than happy to be on the show or talk to me. I don't think you should ever judge a person off of one thing. I don't think you should ever judge a person off of anything. But I think people put people in categories off of looks, off of one thing, and they never choose to understand what's deeper down under the layer of whatever that person is or whoever that thing is. I don't think this idea that society is going to be peaceful is going to ever come true. I don't think society is ever going to hit this point where nobody can ever talk to each other again. I think there's a healthy discourse with communication. And I think people need to understand that first starts in your community. That first starts in your home. That first starts within yourself. And I think a lot of people aren't happy with other people out there because they're not happy with themselves. And I think when you come to a rational discourse within yourself, that there's some things that you need to focus on, and necessarily you're projecting those things onto other people, you can truly start to accept love. And when you truly, here's a interesting thought. The mind and body connection is a class you can take. You know what the class used to be called? It used to be called Love and Kindness, but nobody would sign up for a class called Love and Kindness. It seemed like a yoga retreat. You would think, how many people out there, if you asked, what do you just want in life besides money? What did you want with your soul? I just want love and kindness. I want happiness. I want the world to be peaceful. But nobody signed up for a fucking class that said that. Everyone loves sleep, but nobody wants to die. The world's very counterintuitive on the way that it wants things and the way it doesn't want things. When you start looking at the basic concept of how many people run off with a narrative, or how many people think that whatever they say or whatever they know is fact and everyone else is wrong. How do you know? How do you know? It's best to question. It's best to think, but there's no definitive answers in life. The only definitive is death. You start to
Well,
understand that a little bit differently when you really start to understand that a person's reality is not necessarily need to be in agreement with your own. There's multiple realities out in this world, much like during the ancient Greece or the Roman wars, whatever you want to talk about, whatever war that was going on, just 50 or 100 miles down the road was a whole nother reality that was going on. Pirates are happening the same time as this was happening over here. There's all these different realities that seem like different worlds happening. Why does everyone think that their reality is the one that's true? All the laws that we have are just all agreement that we all agree on the same thing, that eating people is bad and killing people is bad. And the people that break those things, that's not part of their reality. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be punished. It just means that you can't look at them as unredeemable. Nobody in this life is unredeemable. And I really think a lot of people want to put a justification on someone before they even understand that it necessarily might not be true.
oh, I completely agree with that. But I want to push this a little bit further. So as we've seen, we're being pushed as a society,
So I'm not going to stop.
we're being pushed to categorize people, to make snap judgments about people. The messages we're getting are, if these people don't agree with you on this or that issue, you can't talk to them.
Yep.
They don't deserve your basic respect.
They don't
You
deserve
shouldn't
love.
talk to them. They don't deserve love. They don't deserve a job. They don't deserve anything. You can cut them off. That's okay. Why do you think this is happening? Why are we getting these messages?
Well, a house divided cannot stand, right?
Exactly. A house divided against itself cannot stand. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of Brand's channel now, because he calls that out.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm philosophically left wing, but that's not the issue here. The issue is we can't continue down this road. How do we create a new road? And you were saying, if you do something different, if you explore ideas, if you question a prevailing narrative, you're put down. And I think that's absolutely true for the majority of people. But one of the things that we're seeing now, I believe, is that if you take, for example, Russell Brand or Joe Rogan, somebody who has some kind of celebrity or fame, and then they take it in another direction, they can, to a certain extent, I think, ask these questions without being squelched because they have enough money, right, to be independent of the system. Someone like Joe Rogan, isn't he like a millionaire? You know, he's
A
not worried,
millionaire.
isn't he?
He's way more than that.
He's rich enough. He doesn't have to worry about his boss coming across a podcast, you know, because
He
he's
is
his own boss.
yeah.
Right. And it's the same with Russell Brand. He has enough money so that he's independent enough. He can,
I don't have any money, and I'm not worried about anything that I say being used against me to lose a job. I don't ever want to be put in a
you're
position.
a really strong person.
A strong person in what sense? I'm not economically stable. I just have a belief in my head that I don't want anybody to have control over the words that I say.
Well,
If that means a refusal
that's
of a
important.
network, if that means a refusal of anything, I don't want anything having power over me in my own entire life. I kicked coffee. Well, I'm trying to kick coffee because it's caffeine, and I'm noticing it's controlling a lot of the things that I do. It's reliant on that. I don't want anything having power over me, whether the words that I say. When a guest tells me they can't do my show because it might affect their scholarship or their research, you shouldn't be put in a position where that would even reflect onto your work or research. You shouldn't be put in a position where someone would have to moderate what you say, or you have to be careful on every single road you take in life because it might affect your job or your income and you might lose it all. I hate that people have to be put in that position. If people don't notice that that's an issue, then there's a problem. Because that's an issue.
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And I'm glad you brought it up, actually, because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. I thinking back to when I started my PhD, which was in 2011, when I talked about academic research, academic project funding, getting an article published, the stuff that I was thinking about back then, you know, most people like in my family didn't understand any of it. I was the first person to pursue a PhD in my family, and you know, they didn't know anything about how academia worked. So we would sit down and we would talk about it. But I think now that, you know, someone like Dr. Fauci is has this spotlight on him in the media, people are seeing now the degree of corruption.
He's a fucking liar.
In research
He's a
funding.
Goddamn liar. He's a beagle abusing piece of. I'm sorry. I get so mad at
those I mean, that what he did to those. Well, he himself didn't actually do it, but he signed off on the research. And I know, to reference him again, now I'm a broken record, but Russell Brand.
He's just an egomaniac is the thing. And the only reason I know that is because I'm one myself. That's why I hate when people give me compliments, because I know what that demon's like. I know what bullshit is, and he's bullshit. And I'm not saying it because I'm not trying to. I've had someone say you can't say these types of things because it affects a person's. I'm like, well, if he's truly a horrible human being in a sense that he just doesn't care. There's an old interview, Kerry Mullis, the guy who invented the PCR test. He talked about in 1993 about Anthony Fauci, saying that he's just a talking man. He just repeats what scientists tell him, but he knows nothing about science. He shouldn't even be labeled as a scientist. In 1993, he said this. He called out Peter Daszak and all these people that are getting in trouble now from 1993 during the AIDS pandemic, where society's repeating itself.
I looked into a lot of the stuff that happened during the AIDS epidemic, and it's insane. It's completely insane.
A kid had to fight in court just to be able to go back to school because everyone thought that if he went back to school, he would get all the other kids AIDS. That's how it was in society. You don't think society's slipping up with this pandemic, thinking that, remember at the beginning of this thing, saying that everybody was going to die, like every third person you knew was going to be dead from COVID? Did that happen? No. They were telling people you could smoke cigarettes and the cigarettes would actually prevent coronavirus because it would stick to your lungs and not cause the bacteria to get in there. Dumb shit like that. And people were like, wait a minute. That sounds like something a tobacco industry would say. They're like, oh, never mind. The science isn't right on that. It's like, okay, makes sense, right? You start to get to this point where you start to just raising a question is a crime. Really?
Well, to go back to what I was saying, when I talked about just the comparatively low level corruption and favoritism and just really sketchy stuff that my husband and I saw in academia back when we were working on our PhDs and pursuing academic funding. We could see people doing unethical things. He suffered from a lot of that, and that's its own saga that deserves its own podcast. But I don't know if he'd be willing to talk about it. Maybe now. I don't. It was an awful thing, but basically, there's a lot of corruption in academia, and when I would bring it up to people in my family or in my network who are outside of it, they would go, "Wow, it's crazy that people would fight like that over comparatively small amounts of money and things that don't affect other people's lives." But now we see, with everything that's coming out of the NIH and everything connected to this pandemic, we see this sort of corruption just on a massive scale, and people are looking at each other thinking, well, these people are the experts, they're the scientists, they should be committed to the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of knowledge and just making the world a better place and making us all healthier and better. And what do you mean these people are lying to me? And seeing that kind of reaction just really breaks my heart, because if you weren't in academia, I could see how you would think that. You would think, oh, these people are committed to the study of ideas or research or going after.
I used to wonder why people would lose their funding or research. I used to think it was because the institution didn't want to go against what society deemed as wrong. There was a study called it was something about dogs. A guy made a fake research study and put keywords in there that talked about gender and talked about all these things that they would just not even look at. They would automatically accept because it would be against society standards if they said no to it. Then they would get an army of Antifa people at their door yelling at them, telling them to tear down their institution. The guy made a study about it. I think it was called the Inconceivable Penis Project, where the guy talked about that when a man sits with his legs open, he's technically raping the air around him. And it was a fake study. It was just a bunch of large words and made it sound like using statistics and all these types of things. Kept mentioning the word penis and all these different types of things. He included that in the study, put it up to the board. The board just looked at it, saw the keywords, stamped its approval, and passed it through. He goes, "Did you even read it? Did you read it? It didn't make any sense. It's not logical, but it goes against society standards." I used to think that meant that, like, oh, the school just doesn't want to go against society because society's so ramped up. But also there's a thing called Confucius Institutes where they teach people certain things about different histories, about like China and all these types of things. Harvard got a $4.3 million funding to their school from China. There's a bunch of institutions that I started looking at of like, why are these people saying all these types of things when people are trying to research things from like Japan or all these other types of countries trying to research the history behind it? You start to realize a lot of these people that are institutionalized might be a form of brainwashing or mind control from another country. KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov talked about it's a 20-year process of getting a generation of people to hate the country that they live in, decentralizing it and causing a stir up. It's a KGB spy tactic. Now, China, we have Confucius Institutes over there as well, too. But have you noticed all the people that really hate what America is and want to burn this place to the ground, thinking that it's a horrible country to live in? It's not that horrible. It's pretty good. Just the people that are running office right now are not the best people. That's either Republican or Democrat. They're people that have money on their minds rather than people's passion or pride on the forefront. I look at this a little bit deeper now where I start to understand that these might just be tactics. There's a site called Russian Troll Bots. It's a Russian troll farm where they create fake accounts online and stir up animosity with people by just having people like, bot accounts that you see with the verified check.
Yeah.
Other countries do that too, but they stir up animosity with people by putting up tweets or all these types of things that cause people to weigh on things that they necessarily wouldn't ever weigh on if that option wasn't brought up. It's stirring up animosity, and surprisingly, it's really easy to do. And I don't think it's the institution's fault. I think it's another country's fault. I think it's the fault of society that money is more on the forefront than the power of our minds, our perspectives of things. Money talks, and sadly, people's thoughts and opinions fucking walk. And it sucks that it's like that. It really does. And I don't think it's ever going to change unless people can really understand the fact that it shouldn't be this hard to survive. It shouldn't cost this much. A mother of 3 kids should be able to feed her kids without having to work 3 fucking jobs. That's fucking insane to me. I don't think I'm crazy in saying that, but every time I do mention it, people go, that's insane. You're just rambling. I'm like, am I fucking rambling? Did I take a crazy pill? Did I get taken behind a shed when I was a kid and fucked up to where I think this way? I don't think so. But apparently I'm talking nonsense. It's like I'm in the Matrix and everyone else is just happy, shaking their head and nodding up and down and swallowing the fish food that they get fed.
Well, I think one of the things that we're seeing now is that a lot of what was hidden and what people sort of kind of got a sense was going on, but didn't have to openly acknowledge because things were going okay. All of this stuff has been uncovered during the pandemic because it was a major crisis. So that's what crises do. They reveal realities. And more people are seeing the extent of corruption that we were dealing with here in this country and really worldwide. So I think that's immense. But one of the reasons why being in this time is so frustrating is that when you look around, we don't see an opportunity to really galvanize people from all sides saying, okay, look, no matter what our philosophical ideas about how to organize an economy or ideas about religion, we should all come together and realize that there are certain basic things that should be true in a society. For example, it shouldn't be impossible to support your family, right? It should be straightforward to just get a job and be able to support yourself and support your family, and that should be your number one all-consuming struggle. And more than half of your paycheck should not go to rent only. Just basic things like that. And I think there are people online who are questioning these things on all sides of the political spectrum. But again, it's a question of not just ideas, but also power and influence. We've also found, I think, when we see this kind of corruption, what it shows us is that there's a difference between power and authority, right? That's my favorite example that I used to use in class. In the Iliad, the Greeks, it's not just one army, right? There wasn't one country called Greece that had one army. In the Iliad, what we have is a coalition of smaller militias, and they're led by their local leaders. And then all the leaders have to be led by Agamemnon and Menelaus because they started this war because it was Menelaus's wife, Helen, who was taken by Paris back to Troy, right? So it's not a homogeneous thing. So the beginning of the Iliad is Agamemnon, one of these two leaders, getting into a dispute with Achilles, one of the best warriors and a leader of his own local small militia, right? And Agamemnon says, well, actually, I want Briseis, the girl, because I am the leader and you are below me. And she's really pretty and I want her in my tent. And Achilles says, if you take her, you've dishonored me because, this was the war prize that it was voted that I receive. And I'm a great warrior and everybody knows it. And my men are great fighters and everybody knows that too. And if you take this from me, if you take Briseis from me, we're not going to fight anymore. I'm going to go withdraw to my tent. I'm going to tell my men not to fight with your men, and we'll see how well you do. That's the beginning of the Iliad. And what do we see in that event? We see that Agamemnon says, I have power. I have more power than you, Achilles. But Achilles stands up to him and says, well, you might have the power, but you shouldn't be doing this. So he didn't have the authority to do it. Because there's a difference between power and authority. There's a difference between having the ability to just accomplish something and then being the kind of person or having the stature where if you do the thing, other people will look at you and respect you and say, okay, yes, I will go along with this because I respect this person. I respect this person's judgment. People in the Iliad, you can see it's actually really interesting how this is true throughout the poem. Agamemnon is not really that respected. He's not really held up as, a model leader or a model general. And in fact, he's not even really a good fighter. Like in the funeral games of Patroclus, there are these different scenes where Agamemnon is supposed to compete in a contest, but then somebody makes an excuse and there's a back and forth, and then somebody says, oh, but the great king Agamemnon, you don't really need to do this. Why don't you stand aside? I'm nobody to compete with you. And all of these elaborate excuses are made basically so that Agamemnon won't be seen to publicly fail, because everybody knows that he will up against different warriors, right? He won't be as good. He will lose the game. And so it's better that he not lose the game. But by putting him in that situation and then making excuses for him, it's also clear that everybody else knows that he really isn't the guy he's supposed to be. So I think that's what we're seeing now in our society. A lot of people who have power, the raw power to just do things, don't have any authority. They don't have the respect of the people that they govern or the people who work for them. People aren't really willing to sign up and say, okay, yeah, I agree with this. I respect that guy. I'm going to go along with this. They're doing things either because they have to, or because they feel like they have to, that is, or because they're actually being compelled to, by a regulation or a law. But people don't have that feeling of respect. And I think when you don't have that feeling of respect, and you also don't have that feeling of, I have control over my own life and my actions and my thoughts make a difference in my world, then people get really angry. Because, I think it's natural as human beings to have thoughts and you want to enact them in the world. You want to say, okay, actually I do have a great business idea. Why don't we do this? Or I have a great, I love cooking. I love cooking for my friends. Everybody says I should open a restaurant. Hey, why don't I just do that? But if you're in a world where you can't do anything, you can't make an impact at all, no matter how small, then I think, people get really alienated and really angry. And that's what I think the origin of the Karen is, that meme, the angry middle-aged white lady. Yeah, and I think, people aren't born Karens. Karens are created. And I think Karens are created by a world where, you get to a point where you don't have any power. You're not rich enough to have any influence, right? You feel like nobody listens to you, like you don't matter. And so what do? You feel angry and you take that out on somebody else, and you take it out on somebody else by being ridiculously angry over stupid stuff. Because, you can go to the Subway and you can say, you put olives on my sandwich. I hate olives. I'm not going to pay for this. Well, that's not really a reasonable response. A reasonable response would be like, oh, sorry, wasn't I clear? I don't actually want olives on my sandwich. Oh, no, I'm not allergic to olives. You can just take them off. It's cool. We're all right. Okay, good. Thank you. That's normal because people make mistakes. But once you feel like really alienated and you are angry, then it comes out,
Yeah.
and it's just going to come out on whoever's there. And I think that's a symptom of what's going really wrong in our society. I think if people had the opportunity to affect their world and affect change, just even small changes in their own lives, that we would see a lot less anger. I don't think people really want to be angry with each other. I think it's a symptom of other things. But also, like, on the
You're saying a lot.
yeah, I know, because you brought up a lot, but I just want to tie up this other idea. Sorry, I'm not a morning person and I have to think here. When we're talking about power and authority, one of the reasons why I think people who would naturally be seen as those in authority are not seen that way anymore is a huge lack of accountability. Like, nobody's accountable for anything anymore. People do things that are ridiculously illegal and ridiculously corrupt, and nothing happens,
Yeah.
But, God forbid you drive down the road with a broken taillight.
Can't get mad at it. You got to laugh at it. That's what I do. It'll corrupt your mind if you let it.
But it's a huge social problem. And
Yep.
I think people like Rogan and Brand highlight this. Like, we need accountability. People in society need to see that when somebody tells outrageous lies, or, people break laws, or you say that there is a lockdown restriction, but people in the government just openly flout it, and nothing happens to them. I mean, okay, then why do we have this restriction?
It's a double standard.
Yeah. And I think our double standards are just, they're both so open and so extreme that I don't see how things can continue the way they are. I think something is going to give, because I don't think people can function with that level of hypocrisy.
The best thing people can do is just try and be themselves and always question. It's the only thing I can offer as advice.
Yeah, I think we really need to start speaking our minds. Of course, it's harder and harder now because there's so much pressure put on people to conform, and then also economic pressure, and different employers use all these different pressures to mold people's behavior. I mean, I think it was a while back I saw a video on YouTube where a lot of people
I got to wrap it up here in a minute, Valerie.
Okay. Sure. A lot of Gen Z.
I was seeing a whole thing going, like, talking about history for a minute. I was like, oh God. I was like, I think I could sit through that one.
Just a lot of Gen Z employees were saying that they thought that it was okay that an employer could scrutinize your social media, for example.
It's not okay.
And that, yeah. And I was just like, wow, that's a huge generational difference, because I don't feel that old, but I'm older than they are. And my first reaction to that was, that's totally wrong. Your social media is an expression of who you are.
Yeah.
So something's got to give in the society. And I really hope that it goes in a more positive direction of just questioning and sharing ideas together like you do on your podcast. So I know you're taking a break, but I hope that you keep doing what you're doing in whatever way you can.
I'll have you back on after I hit 1,000.
Cheers.
Perfect. All right, Valerie, where can people find you? Got any links you want to say to anybody out there listening?
Well, I took a break this summer and I'm doing some rebranding, but I'm going to start a podcast in the next year, in January, hopefully, about my research. So I'm going to do that through the name that I've only got on Instagram right now, which is Dr. Valerie is in. So that's DrValerie is in. And right now I'm only on Instagram, but I hope to start a podcast and maybe even like a Patreon in 2022. So that's the plan.
I'll link it all in the description and promote it as much as I can once you create it.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.